Morning.
Hi, Charlotte. We're just getting all of the students to come in. We're just inviting everyone now to come into the room. And in a second, I'll start. Bear one sec. Okay, thank you everyone for joining us. That's really great to see lots of people here coming to our first academic lecture of this new year. And we've got a really good one today. So we've got a really popular university and a course that I get asked about quite a lot. So it's one we've been really looking forward to having in. So we've got James King. He's here from Loughborough, and he is there from the Faculty of Sport and Exercise Science. So obviously he's going to be telling you a lot about that, and obviously anything you want to know about careers, the actual working within what the course is like, and any questions really at all that you have. As always, if you have a question, because James is going to do a presentation that will last half an hour or so, if a question comes to mind while you're listening to the presentation, just put it in the chat and we will put it to James at the end of the session. So we'll have that Q&A section with him at the end of the session. So any questions at all, just add them to the chat function and that's what we will do, okay? So I'm going to hand over now to James. And he will take on and tell you a bit more about the sports science program at Loughborough. James.
Thanks very much. I'll just share the screen. It's that one there. So hopefully you can all see those slides. Is that okay?
Yes, that's absolutely great, James. We can all see that really well. So you're presenting well.
I'll make a start then. So yeah, so I believe it's good afternoon with everybody over there. It's 9 o'clock in the morning here. So yeah, it's nice to be asked to talk a little bit today about our discipline, that's sport and exercise science. I'm a senior lecturer in exercise physiology at Loughborough University. I've been here for several years as an undergraduate, as a PhD student. I then worked in research for several years and then finally got a lectureship a few years ago. I guess the reason why I've been asked to give this talk today is because I'm also the program director for the sport and exercise science degree program. So at Loughborough we have about 4 different sport programs, but sport and exercise science is probably the most prominent one, and certainly where we take the most number of students each year. Just for those of you who don't know where Loughborough is, I've got a little map on the right-hand side of the slide there. And you can see we kind of sit in between Leicester, Derby and Nottingham. And I'm sure most of you more recently have heard of Leicester, probably related to the football and the success of the team in recent years. So basically we're in the middle, slightly to the east. Sorry, it's not changing slide at the moment. There we go. So yes, I'll start by just talking broadly about what is sport and exercise science, because I think traditionally people, if you go back like many years when sports science first came about, there was a bit of a perception that kind of sports science was just like PE, when actually the discipline has developed a lot within recent years and actually is now a very strict scientific subject. So you can see there in kind of what I've written. So it applies scientific principles, theories, and ideas to human performance and physical activity. And I've underlined 2 parts there, which are really important. The first one being the issue of scientific principles and theories. So like I've just said there, sports science now is grounded very much so in the hard disciplines of biology, chemistry, physics, maths, and psychology there. So you can see things like exercise physiology that we study is essentially biology. We study exercise biochemistry and metabolism, which is chemistry. When we look at biomechanics and motor control, we're really dealing with physics and maths, and things like skill acquisition and again motor control sort of moves into the discipline of psychology. So sports science these days is not an easy subject at all. It is very much grounded in central science and mathematics. The other issue there that I've highlighted is that it involves both performance and physical activity. So again, more traditionally, sports science, I guess the discipline developed more in relation to the application to elite sport performance, which is still very much prominent within the degree programme, but also this idea of physical activity, and actually the idea that exercise can be used almost like medicine. So there's a whole sort of area now of exercise as medicine, and that's using physical activity to prevent and manage a whole host of chronic diseases that are very prevalent in today's society. So what is it to be a sport and exercise scientist? So again, traditionally within the elite sport domain, you know, many students come to us because they want to be, or they want a career at least within elite sport and within elite sport science support. So by that, I mean, they want to be working with athletes and helping athletes and teams to optimally prepare for competition, perform to their best, optimize their recovery, and so on. And you can see some of the job titles listed on the left-hand side there. So we're talking about positions like being an exercise physiologist, a sports nutritionist, sports psychologist, someone who works in performance analysis, or somebody who works in the area of sort of biomechanics. And essentially all of these are applied sports science positions. And I'm sure you can appreciate these days with the elite sport industry being as big as it is, and obviously a very wealthy industry, you know, related to television money and things like that. More and more so, every elite team or elite athlete will have all of these people surrounding them to enable them to optimize their sporting potential. So a lot of our students come to us because they want to take up one of these careers and indeed eventually end up working within one of these roles. But I've said it's not just about elite sport, and increasingly we have more students come to us who want to get into this area of exercise as medicine. And I should say we've got more than 70 years worth of scientific evidence that shows that being regularly active and performing sort of exercise training can help to prevent, but also now manage many health problems that we frequently see. And this is actually the area that I work in with my research. I do a lot of research in the area of type 2 diabetes and using exercise and nutrition to hopefully prevent people getting type 2 diabetes, but also then if people do get diabetes, to help them manage their blood sugar in a healthy way. So just some recent sort of headlines within the BBC related to this, you know, studies coming out, things like running marathon can cut years off the age of your arteries, so helps to keep your arteries nice and elastic. And even things now, there's a whole movement called prehabilitation, and this is based on evidence that we know, which shows that actually if people perform exercise training before having major operations, or before they start taking cancer chemotherapy, patient outcomes are better afterwards. So our National Health Service now actually funds exercise training for patients before things like heart surgery, because we know that if you're fit and healthier before you have surgery, you do better. And this whole movement and the funding that it's attracted has provided lots of opportunities for our graduates. So what does a degree programme within sport and exercise science look like? So here is essentially the sport and exercise science degree at Loughborough. This is the degree programme that I look after. On the right-hand side, I've just explained this very briefly, but on the right-hand side, the subject-related knowledge and skills block, you can see the green boxes which relate to the modules at Part A, so Year 1, Year 2 and Year 3. So we call that Part A, Part B and Part C. You can see in green the modules that we have in broadly in sort of physiology and nutrition. Biochemistry is in there as well. In the red boxes, you can see the biomechanics and motor control modules that we have. And then in the blue boxes, you can see the sports psychology modules. And essentially they progress in difficulty and application as students move towards Year 3. On the left-hand side, you can see these white boxes, which refer to modules that relate to research, employability and professional development. And essentially we have two strands there. On the very left, you can see modules related to things like research methods that build towards kind of the final research project in your third year. You might know that as a dissertation, which is essentially a major piece of research that our students do. And then to the right of that, on kind of the right-hand side of the white boxes there, one of the unique kind of selling points for our degree is we have a strand of modules in employability and professional development. And this is really modules that help students to apply the theory in the coloured boxes to real-world application. So that might be, as an example, work within a module where students are essentially trying to solve an industry-wide problem, or helping, say, athletes prepare for Olympic Games and things like that. So it's the application of theory to real-world experience and real-world events, which helps our graduates to secure employment once they finish with us at Loughborough. So that's our sports and exercise science degree programme. What I should say is, though, that sports science just generally can be a bit broader than that, and actually the old degree programme that we had at Loughborough several years ago that I undertook was a much broader programme. And as you can see here, this is our sports science coaching and physical education programme. And the difference with this degree programme is that, as you can see at the top there, it has a greater focus on physical education and coaching. So modules in sort of pedagogy, which is kind of like the science of teaching, but also coaching and working with athletes in that sort of way. So more kind of the social science approaches. So at Loughborough, we have academics who work in pedagogy, but also kind of social sciences and sports sociology, sports policy, and all of these sorts of things. So if you are looking at a sports science degree programme, just be aware that the discipline at large does span, the physiology and nutrition, but all the way across to the social sciences disciplines as well. So make sure when you're picking a degree programme, if you choose to go into sports science, that you're just aware of the modules and the in-depth content, because it could have quite a strong bearing on your degree programme. So if I talk sort of more broadly about the degree programme in kind of sport and exercise science that I oversee, so what will you actually study? So I've mentioned the discipline of exercise physiology and how this relates, to essentially to biology. But really within this suite of modules and this strand, you're looking at the key systems within the body. So whether it's the respiratory system, the cardiovascular system, and so on. So you're learning about anatomy and physiology, how these systems work, but importantly, how single bouts of exercise or acute exercise, as well as exercise training, how does this affect the function and even structure of these systems? So as an example, how does the respiratory system respond to a bout of exercise, or how does a period of exercise training change gene expression in your muscle, change how the heart works, and things like that. So it's the application, it's understanding the biology, but also how exercise changes the biology and ultimately enables athletes to perform at a top level, or indeed helps people improve their health. So just some pictures just related to that to give you some examples. So you can see there in the top right, Chris Froome, so obviously an elite cyclist. The question there being, what is it in the physiology of Chris Froome that enables him to complete 3 weeks of cycling every day in the Tour de France, churning out huge power outputs on his bike day after day. Whereas if I was to get on a road bike, I wouldn't be able to perform anything like that. So how does his physiology differ? Similarly, you can see Dina Asher-Smith at the bottom there. How is it that athlete there can run the 100 meters in just over 10 seconds? Whereas again, if I was to try and do that, I'd probably do it in about 15 seconds or something like that. So our students are trying to understand what is it about the physiology of these individuals that enable them to compete at the very highest level. Again, more examples here. So you can see recently, so Bradley Wiggins, it's probably a year or so ago now, set the world record for cycling as far as anybody could do within an hour, which he covered about 55 kilometers in a velodrome. Whereas this was one of my PhD students at the time, Matt, who was a very fit chap. He played football for Manchester United's youth team. But when I put Matt on a bike at the same power output that Bradley Wiggins maintained for an hour, Matt could only maintain that intensity for 49 seconds. So what is it about Bradley Wiggins' physiology that enables him to do that when us mere mortals can only achieve that for about 49 seconds? Similarly, my PhD student there on the right, Scott, I put him on a treadmill at the speed that Eliud Kipchoge maintained when he completed the marathon in just under 2 hours. So that's a treadmill clipping along at about 21 kilometers per hour, which is essentially a sprint for people like me. So Scott could only maintain that intensity for 36 seconds, essentially before falling off the treadmill, whereas Kipchoge was able to maintain that intensity for just under 2 hours. What is it about Kipchoge that enables him to maintain that intensity and run a marathon in under 2 hours? These are the sorts of things that you will look at within exercise physiology. Sports nutrition, again, is a key part of our degree program within sports science. So yes, you're looking at the basics of nutrition, so things like carbohydrates, proteins, fats, macronutrients as we call them, but also how we can use nutrition again to optimize performance and health. So things like, most of you I'm sure will be aware that consuming the right carbohydrates is important for things like endurance performance, but also hydration. There you can see in the image, how does hydration affect performance, and also things like supplementation. So you can see on the right hand side there, you can see beetroot juice, which if any of you follow sport quite in depth, you'll know that our athletes, a lot of our endurance athletes, but also indeed our footballers these days, consume beetroot juice because it improves endurance performance by having effects on blood vessels, and also improving the efficiency of muscle contraction. So that's something that's come from sports nutrition recently that our athletes are now putting in practice. And similarly at the bottom there, you can see the carbohydrate drink that Kipchoge used when completing his marathon under 2 hours. And this is an advance in science from sports nutrition for a drink that essentially now forms a gel in the stomach and enables us to deliver more carbohydrate at a quicker rate to get into our athletes' systems that enables them to maintain performance at a higher intensity for a longer period of time. So this is the discipline of sports nutrition that our students look at. And sports psychology. So sports psychology, I think it's fair to say, is a discipline within sports science that has really boomed and come to the fore within recent years. And I like sort of this quote here that sports 90% physical but 10% mental, but it's the 10% mental that gives us 90% of the problems. And I like to think of the whole sort of analogy of, when you're looking at, say, a race and everybody's on the start line. In elite terms, everybody's blessed with the right genetic background, but they're also all essentially professional athletes and thoroughly trained. What is it that determines the person who will win the race compared to the individual who might come fourth? And that's where sports psychology can really come in and make that marginal sort of gain. But ultimately, you can see on the slide there some of the types of things that people study within sports psychology. So psychological problems within sport, whether it's overtraining, career transitions, eating disorders, factors that impact on sports performance, so managing stress and coping, motivation and things like that. Also things like skill acquisition, so how do we teach skills, how do people learn skills, and then more in relation to kind of exercise and health, sport and exercise participation, so how do we change behavior. So I've said that we know that if you're regularly active, it benefits your health, but actually it's very difficult to get people to be regularly active and actually change behavior. So there's a whole science around behavior change and improving people's confidence and ability to engage within physical activity. So that's kind of the realm of sports psychology in a very quick sort of tour. And some examples again, so if anybody's interested in golf, you'll know Rory McIlroy, who's quite famous for having sort of thrown away a couple of major championships right at the last moment. Perhaps the emotions and the nerves got to him. And it's quite well known now that Rory McIlroy works with sports psychologists and practices things like meditation and visualization to try and help him improve his performance. And I've seen a quote from Rory saying he actually spends just about the same amount of time preparing his mind before competition as he does spend on the practice range. So he clearly thinks sports psychology is quite important for him. But I mentioned career transitions, and unfortunately we have players like Paul Gascoigne, who again is quite famous for kind of struggling within his personal life after leaving football and losing his identity. And unfortunately, we have many professional athletes who also struggle with the transition out of elite sport. And then finally, there, kind of the example there related to behaviour change and just getting people to be active within their own lives. The final major discipline is that of biomechanics and motor control. So essentially, biomechanics is really the application of physics and maths to understand human movement. So this is the realm of sort of kinesiology, human mechanics, and it has quite a theoretical and an analytical component. But you can see there in the text, when we study biomechanics, we're really dealing with these physics type subjects like forces, projectile motion, acceleration, some neurophysiology, movement analysis, and so on. And again, in terms of examples, so these are some that kind of happen at Loughborough. So you can see the cricketer on the left-hand side. You can perhaps see all of the infrared cameras and all of the dots on the on the athlete. This is essentially tracking his movements of his limbs. And this is related to research where the scientists are trying to understand injury within fast bowlers in cricket. So by understanding the movement and the forces going through the different bones and muscles, we can perhaps change people's sort of movement and reduce the risk of injury. Similarly, you can see the gymnast in the top right-hand corner there. So our guys in biomechanics at Loughborough, they do a lot of work looking at gymnastics. And from a theoretical perspective, you know, they help our gymnastics to develop routines for major competitions. And they can even do things like simulate routines and see if, for example, adding an extra twist into a routine is possible based on an athlete's strength and flexibility and things like that. So very much application to closed skills like gymnastics and even golf in the right-hand corner there. So we can use biomechanics and movement analysis to kind of understand things like the golf swing. So why is it that a golfer might be fading the ball or drawing the ball too much or pulling the ball? We can break their movement down and try and help them to optimize their performance. But I've mentioned again, so that's very much sports performance examples, but health and well-being is a major part of sport and exercise science now. And I've mentioned this is where my research background is. And I'm the module leader for the final year module in the physiology of sport, exercise and health. Within this sort of health angle, we're looking at using physical activity and exercise to try and improve people's health and well-being. And just an example there, you can see that's essentially in the middle of the screen there, a metabolic pathway. So in the realm of exercise metabolism, by which glucose is taken out of the circulation and into skeletal muscle. So we know that people with diabetes have problems with their insulin, but fortunately exercise can circumvent the requirement for insulin to take up sugar out of the blood and into the muscle. So essentially by the molecular pathways we've defined there, we know that exercise can provide an alternative therapy for people who have things like type 2 diabetes. But we also look at other conditions, you know, like obesity, cancer, cardiovascular disease, and things like that. But I guess I'm explaining this at large because it's probably less well known, but this whole health angle is a very big component of all sport and exercise science degree programs these days. In terms of what skills you'll develop, so research skills is always a big part of a higher education degree program, but particularly within sports and exercise science, there's a very well-defined practical component to many of the modules that you'll study. So particularly within disciplines like exercise physiology and biochemistry, you'll spend quite a lot of time in laboratories, undertaking research and conducting experiments and building your practical skills, which obviously will help you when you leave university and seek employment. Within our degree program and generally most degree programs, you'll conduct a major research project in the final year, also known as the dissertation. And again, this really does help develop your research skills, which are really, really important. And within our sort of dissertation module, within physiology and metabolism, which I actually look after this module as well, you'll be doing experiments like looking at people's responses to exercise. Now that can be from a performance angle or a health angle. Recently, I've had students, you can see there in the image in the middle, taking muscle biopsies. So looking at what happens after people have done exercise to the metabolism that's happening with the skeletal muscle. Obviously, undergraduate students wouldn't just start taking a muscle biopsy on their own. They'd work with some of our more senior researchers, but you would be conducting projects with possibly invasive techniques contributing towards your dissertation. Equally, students can choose to do dissertations and research projects within psychology or some of the social sciences, as well as biomechanics. I've just given the example there of kind of physiology because that's where my background lies. But ultimately, research is a key part of this degree program because the actual act of doing research is a really good way to learn and to foster your skills more broadly. I've mentioned before that we have a bit of a kind of a unique selling point to our degree at Loughborough, which is this whole idea of employability skills and professional skills, and specifically encouraging students to develop these skills, which will hopefully enable them to more easily gain the employment they're desiring once they finish with us at Loughborough. So we have explicit modules that are focused around students performing tasks and assessments that are valued by industry, whether this is, performing group presentations, trying to solve problems within industry, preparing athletes for competition, you name it. And the reason why we've included this part to our degree is because there was a review in the area that Loughborough led, which essentially said that within the UK, sports science degrees are really good at giving people the theoretical knowledge, but there's a little bit of a mismatch between what the universities are delivering and what industry requires. So we've added this professional development element to our degree to bridge that gap between industry and kind of the theoretical side that universities are really good at delivering. I should say, so within years 2 and 3, our students at Loughborough, and again more broadly within sports science, certainly within the UK, get an opportunity to undertake a placement year. So at Loughborough, students can conduct a diploma in professional studies, which is a placement, essentially can be anywhere within the world, but tends to be more UK based, or they can conduct the diploma in international studies. And by that, that's where students go abroad to undertake a year of study at one of our partner institutions. But really, these are a year out of your degree programme between years 2 and 3 to gain some more sort of real world experience. And certainly with regards to the diploma in professional studies, we have students who go to all of these types of places that you can see in the images there. So a lot of our students want to go in and get experience working with elite sport. So we have students who go to places like Chelsea Football Club, Leicester Tigers Rugby Club, Leicester City Football Club, or all of these sort of brands and places you can see on the image here, as well as health-based, health-focused industry as well. And on top of that, like I said, we've got the diploma in international studies. So our students do go to Canada, Australia, and places like that to get a bit of experience, living abroad, and sometimes learning a different language actually, but just really going somewhere different to get a broader perspective of life. In terms of graduate careers, so I've listed what I think is probably the main, in a general sense, the main 4 areas that our students go into. So at the top there, a lot of students like to go into applied exercise science. So they want to become an exercise physiologist or a performance analyst, a sports nutritionist, and so on. I should say these are very competitive career roles, and students have to get a lot of experience during their degree. Many individuals who want to go into these roles will conduct a placement in the area and gain extra experience. And indeed, increasingly so, many of our students who want to get into these roles will undertake a master's degree as well after their undergraduate programme. The second sort of title there is the health and wellbeing industry. So increasingly so, many more of our students now work in the health and wellbeing industry, whether that's as a cardiac or respiratory physiologist within our health service, whether it's working in local government, the private sector, all sorts of different opportunities now within the health and wellbeing industry. And I think this just generally, if you think about we obviously have an infectious disease pandemic at the moment, but for many years we've had a pandemic of obesity and chronic disease. So our population more broadly has not been well for a long time. And there's been increasing funding because of this that's been dedicated to the health and wellbeing industry. And our discipline within sports science and clinical exercise physiology has grown considerably. And I think going forwards will continue to grow increasingly in the next decade or so. Teaching and research as well. So I think probably the most common reference I write for my personal tutees is for basically teacher training in either PE or just science more broadly. Many of our students also, like I've said, go on to do master's programs and even PhDs. And with that, you can go into industry more broadly, for example, the pharmaceutical industry. But a lot of our students do like to go into teaching and research. And then on top of that, you can see at the bottom there, just general graduate employment schemes. So one of the nice things with sport and exercise science is that it can be a degree for the all-rounder. So you need to be good at a number of subjects. So I mentioned at the start there, biology, chemistry, physics, maths. Our best sports scientists are good at multiple disciplines. And because of this, and I think also linked to the fact that a lot of our graduates have a keen interest in sport and tend to play sport at a reasonable level, when you combine all of those characteristics, and if you think about elite playing sports at a good level, it teaches lots of different skills. So things like leadership, discipline, competitiveness, things like that. When you add that to the broadness of the sports science degree, some of these general graduate schemes, these employers really do like our students. So we do have students who go into accountancy, banking, journalism, the retail sector, and so on. And if you want to learn a bit more about this, I would encourage you to go to the BASES website, which is the British Association of Sport and Exercise Science, because they've published this guide to careers in sport and exercise science quite recently. So you can go there and you can see some case studies from recent graduates. They've got some information there about career pathways and tips for people who want to enter this industry. Like I've said there, so recent references I've written most commonly are for master's programs. Recently, that's been in cardiovascular sciences, so somebody wanting to go into the health industry, exercise science, and even physiotherapy. So a common question I get asked with regards to physiotherapy is, will the sports science degree qualify me as a physiotherapy? Which unfortunately the answer is no, it won't. So if you know you want to do physiotherapy as a degree, you should do a physiotherapy degree, because there's a very specific practical element to a physiotherapy degree that a sports science degree won't prepare you for. I've written a lot of PhD applications for some of our graduates recently, and as well as that, a lot of teacher training applications for the PGCE degree. With regards to entry requirements, so, these entry requirements will differ depending on the university you're applying for. So obviously, if you're applying for one of the top universities like Loughborough ultimately is with regards to sports science, the entry requirements are quite high. Whereas obviously you can, there's multiple institutions within the UK that offer sports science degrees, and these entry requirements might not be as high at other institutions. But you can see here for Loughborough, so with A levels, we're making offers typically at 3 A's, and you're having to have at least one subject from the preferred list that you can see at the top there. Sometimes we do take AAB if an applicant has multiple of those preferred subjects. We also obviously take the International Baccalaureate, which I'm not really an expert on, but you can ultimately see that the requirements there are quite high. And again, there's preferred subjects. And similarly, the BTEC qualification, which is more of a UK-based thing, I believe, you can get in with a BTEC. Again, you're needing distinctions across the board in combination with at least one A level as well. And on top of that, we do look at GCSEs, and again, needing essentially what used to be a B or a level 7 or 6 in mathematics, English and science. So what now in terms of if you're maybe thinking of going into sports science as a degree program and a career, I'd encourage you to go and look at the British Association of Sport and Exercise Science website. So BASES are essentially the UK sort of leading body that looks at sport and exercise science. So there's lots of useful information on their website. Equally, particularly if you're interested in the health angle, I'd encourage you to go to the American College of Sports Medicine website, who have all sorts of information around sort of using exercise as a therapy to prevent and treat chronic diseases. And particularly the Exercise Medicine Initiative, you can see the logo there. That's an initiative that the American College of Sports Medicine have promoted recently. On top of that, if you've got any particular questions related to Loughborough, I've put the Loughborough sort of generic email address there in the bottom left, which is the ug-sport@elborough.ac.uk. That will take you to the team at Loughborough if you have any particular questions for Loughborough. So I'll end my talk there, and obviously I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody might have.
Thank you, James. That was absolutely wonderful. Very comprehensive. I think we can all see why Loughborough is seen as the kind of premier destination for this subject, from the way you've presented that information. It's really brilliant. Just to say, I'll ask you a few more questions in a bit that we've got from our students and from us as well. Just a few more kind of housekeeping things that we've got here for everyone. We've got Charlotte Davison is also with us, and she is the International Officer for Loughborough. So if you look in the chat, you'll see her contact details. So again, more broad questions relating to Loughborough, she can help you with and answer them as well. We've also got, if you look in the chat, Ms Shazza has added a feedback section there. So for just any kind of feedback for this session, it's really good for us. So when we're planning these in the future, I'll remind you about that at the end, and Ms Shazza will put up another slide about that, but just to remind you to do that, okay? So if you don't mind, James, and we've got Charlotte there as well. If it moves over to your side, Charlotte, I'll address it to you. Okay, so one question that has come up in the chat is, can we do sports medicine in particular orthopedics from this degree? So orthopedics as an area, James, how does that fit in with your line?
So by that, I'm guessing what is meant is in relation to a more formal medical sort of qualification.
I think so, yes.
Yeah, so not really. So in terms of what we tend to have at Loughborough, we have intercalated medical students. So if you want to go into orthopedics, then essentially you need to undertake a medical degree. But within medical degrees, students get the opportunity to take a year out and go and do what they call an intercalated year. So we probably get about 20 students every year that come from medical schools across the country and even internationally who come because they want to become more of an expert in sort of sports science, possibly because they're thinking when they finish medicine, their specialty might be sports medicine, for example. So essentially for those individuals, they are conducting or they are going through a medical degree, but then they're doing this extra bit of training just to supplement that so that when they finish, they can go down that career path. But unfortunately, you can't do a 3-year degree, undergraduate degree in sports science and then become qualified as an orthopedic medic.
Okay, so you kind of know initially, but there are pathways further down that could work. A similar one in terms of I think there are a few things that often come up in terms of just definitions, and this is the difference between a nutritionist and a dietitian. What would you say to that, James?
Yeah, it's a good question, actually. I think in my mind, so the difference would be that a dietitian would be somebody probably more clinically focused. So doing a dietetics degree would be somebody who would then go off and work in the health service, and you're dealing with patients, not just obviously in relation to, well, not really in relation into sport, but you could be dealing with patients with obesity or food intolerances and things like that. So I think a dietitian is a more clinical role, whereas a sports nutritionist would be more, focused on the application to sport. So a nutritionist in a sporting sense and as a career, you'd be, we've got students who, I had a student who now works for Tottenham Hotspur Football Club, and she essentially advises the chefs and liaises with the coaches to draw up menus and oversee players' eating plans based on their specific needs. So that's sports nutrition, where the dietetics is more of a clinical role.
Excellent. Okay, that's fantastic. One thing I did want to know is just a little bit more about you, actually. I think people would be quite interested to know your background coming into this. What was your kind of original intention when you went to study? Did you want to be an athlete or a coach? Did you have a certain set path pre-planned out for yourself?
Yeah, so I've always been interested in sport from a young age. I played football at a decent level, retired now. But I did the undergraduate degree in sports and exercise science a long time ago. That was at Loughborough, which is quite funny because I'm now program director for the degree program I took as a student. I was going to do a master's program. So actually, I took the degree on. I decided to do sport and exercise science because at the time I was thinking of either being a teacher, probably a PE teacher, or I was interested in going in the Royal Air Force as a physical training officer. So that was why I took the degree in the first place. But when towards the end, I was getting quite good grades and it was suggested that I should do a master's program. In the end, actually, I got offered a PhD studentship. So I kind of skipped the master's and started a PhD for 3 years, completed that. I then ended up staying at Loughborough and doing research in this area of exercise and health for about 5 years. And then got a lectureship essentially. So I guess initially I didn't think I'd be doing, when I was sort of 17, 18, I didn't imagine I'd end up doing what I now do. I was very much looking towards probably teaching in some capacity, to be honest.
Okay, that's really interesting. And obviously you said a long time ago, obviously James has been so successful in all this stuff that he's actually 57 and he just looks that good at this stage, but how long ago it was, we'll find out another time. I'll give you a break from talking for a bit, James. I just thought largely we do tend to focus these sessions on the subject and the topic. I think Loughborough's quite an interesting institution more broadly anyway. It's one we often use as a kind of example of a campus university and a very particular environment. So we've got Charlotte here as well. Charlotte, do you just want to give us just a little bit of a general thing about what it's like to be at Loughborough, and what can you tell us about being there? Because it's quite an interesting place.
Yeah, absolutely. So similar to James, actually, for those of you I've not met before, I studied at Loughborough. So I did history and geography as my degree. So Loughborough is very famous for sport, but I went to Loughborough as someone who is not particularly sporty at all. I have an appreciation for sport, but no natural talent. So sport wasn't a big part of my life. But I chose Loughborough because it was a campus. So I know that I wanted to go to a campus university with a real kind of focus on being a student, the student experience, and the support around that. I went to a nice small school where there was a real community there, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it. So when I was looking at universities, I knew that I'd fit in and I'd succeed better somewhere where there was more of a student focus. And Loughborough is one of the largest campuses in the UK. I grew up in the UK, so I was obviously able to visit, which is a little bit different at the moment for you guys, being in Malaysia and also obviously with COVID and no travel. But I looked at about 12 different universities, and it was Loughborough whose campus I walked onto, and I thought, that's where I want to live. And that was 10 years ago since I visited Loughborough to look at the universities, and I have never left. I never planned to stay working for the university or stay living in Loughborough, but I think, you know, same with James, you start a degree perhaps with one focus. Again, I thought I might want to work in teaching, but I wasn't really sure. Doing a humanities subject, it can kind of lead anywhere. And it was all the things that I got involved with when I was a student that made me realise, actually, there's different paths I'd never thought about. So we've got a fantastic careers service who work with students all the way through their degree. So even in my first semester as a student, they were like, right, what are you going to do when you graduate? And I was like, whoa, I've not even got over my homesickness yet. Like, I haven't even done my first assignments, and you want to know what I'm going to do. But they introduced new things, so marketing. So that kind of became my plan halfway through, to work in marketing. And then when I graduated and this job was available, I was like, that sounds pretty good. But yeah, Loughborough is very supportive, lots of on-campus accommodation, sports on campus naturally, societies, things to get involved with. So I loved it, absolutely loved it.
That's fantastic. I thought it was worth just giving a bit of an overview that it is a very unique university, and it's one we've sent lots of students to in the past. So again, as well as Charlotte for that kind of contact, we've got lots of alumni, former students who are currently studying and have studied there as well. So that's a really good thing. I'll go back to you just on a few more questions then that we've got for you. So one of the things that I was quite interested with as you were talking were these additional things, particularly the kind of maths and statistics and that end of things. I just wonder if you could just give a bit more of an example about how what that looks like on the course, how these skills are actually utilised. What sort of things are you doing where maths, statistics and that world data is used quite commonly?
Yeah, so in a few places really. So I guess the most explicit areas would be within the sort of the biomechanics suite of modules, which essentially runs all the way through the degree. Like I said, that biomechanics is really, it's physics and mathematics to understand human movement. So a lot of calculations, a lot of theoretical work there. But also on top of that, you mentioned statistics, the strand of research. So, you know, that starts in year one with a bit of an introduction to the whole idea of research, but then the formal research methods modules and statistics starts to come in there. And that certainly progresses to our dissertation or our research project module, which is compulsory on our degree program for all students. So obviously statistically analysing your data in the correct way is essential for that large piece of research. And that project's actually really, it's a double weighting. So the research project, I think, ends up being about 20% of your final degree grade.
Excellent. Okay. Another thing that comes, I mean, Loughborough we know are very good when it comes to looking at the EPQ and using the EPQ potentially as part of your entry requirements. So those EPQ essays are something that our students look at. I know from having looked at the topics for a lot of the sports science students, they often look at performance enhancing drugs. That tends to be a common topic. Is that something you cover in quite a lot of detail? I mean, is that something you look at on this? How does that fit into it, or not so much?
Not so much, really. Possibly in relation to in the third year, there's a sports nutrition module, and I think it creeps in there a little bit. and also potentially a little bit in the biochemistry. But it's not really a core part of our degree program, actually.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
Okay. And I think we've covered lots of stuff. Again, while I'm asking this last question, if anyone wants to put anything in the chat, please do. I think obviously a lot of the work we do is on careers and looking forward. To be honest, I think you were so comprehensive in your view of the transferable skills and how it goes forward. I think that's been covered brilliantly. I think maybe could we look a bit further forward? I mean, what do you think as someone that studies this area all the time? And obviously looking at our graduates by the time they get into industry, what do you see kind of 10 years time as being, you know, the growth areas in sports science? Where could it lead?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think, I think the biggest area of growth will be the health aspect of the degree program. So already within maybe the last 5 years, there are many more sort of roles and pathways for our graduates to go down. We're even at Loughborough at the moment, and generally actually some colleagues at Liverpool were doing quite a lot at the moment in terms of formalising like a clinical physiology pathway. So with that, we look to Canada and America. They've got very clear pathways for our sports scientists to become trained to essentially work with patients and deliver exercise interventions. Whereas in the UK, we're a little bit behind. So there are some roles within the health service, but certainly the pathway could be more broad, could be more clearly defined, and the qualifications more obvious. But I think just generally the health and well-being industry is an area that is going to continue to get bigger and bigger, and our graduates will have more and more opportunities to go there. And certainly I see from my conversations with my tutees and just the students on the degree program, there are more and more students who, because it used to be that students came to us and then they became aware of the health aspect, and then a selection of those by the end would be looking to go into that area. Whereas now I think the students are more aware of it when they actually arrive. But I do think that the health sector and the wellbeing industry will continue to get bigger. And on top of that, I just think more broadly, the elite sport aspects as well. So, you know, I think it's fair to say most elite sporting individuals or clubs, whether it's football, rugby, hockey, there are a whole team of people around these athletes now. And I think that will just get bigger and bigger and more extensive as well. And I think probably to have a more international perspective. So originally we used to see a lot of our students, you know, take up positions in the UK. Now, actually, I see many examples of students, one recently who'd gone into football. So I think she did a placement at Chelsea Football Club doing performance analysis with the footballers, finished the placement, finished her degree, worked again with Chelsea for a few years, but then went to America and has since worked in American football, ice hockey, because a lot of these skills within sports science support are quite generic. So I think that the market will become much more international. So our students will have more opportunities for employment across the globe, really.
Well, that's a wonderful answer and a really positive one as well. I think we've got one more in the chat, which is it's obviously de rigueur now. You have to ask about COVID, something about. So bearing in mind you've got this big kind of health epidemic taking place. Is that something you guys are likely to use the data from, or have that as a thing? This has highlighted a lot of other health problems in people, and obviously highlighted the importance of being fit and healthy as well. Are you going to use that data, you think, going forward, James?
Yeah, you mean in a research sort of way?
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, in terms of obviously highlighting, I suppose, a lot of however really, or the health of the nation has kind of had another kind of check over, really, hasn't it? So
yeah, I think it's a really big issue actually. So lots of colleagues in our school, and even I've been working with collaborators in the local sort of medical schools in Leicester who we work with a lot. Done a lot of research around this area. And I think generally a lot of the works within our discipline of sort of sports and exercise science and health, it's kind of highlighted that actually we've got an aging population, which is really come into focus now. And obviously with an older population, more disease, greater health costs, but also I guess linked to sort of social inequalities as well. There are a lot of people within society who are actually very unwell and who are very much reliant upon the health service for medicines Essentially, we have a big section of our population who 30 years ago probably wouldn't be living beyond their 50s if it wasn't for the advances in medicine and surgeries. So we do have a number, or a chunk of society, who really only live to the ages that they're living because of medical intervention. And I think the pandemic has really highlighted that now, and it's one of the reasons why we've seen such big problems within our health service. But yeah, I know many colleagues who, the one good thing from the UK government has been they've released a lot of money for research very quickly. So a lot of colleagues who have in various different ways, contributed to research around COVID-19 and obviously trying to help overcome the pandemic.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Okay, we'll bring it to a close there then now. We say thank you for coming. It's really great. I hope you found this really useful and you got all the contacts. Very quickly, Ms Shaz is going to put up this so you can do whatever you're supposed to do with this. Scan it, zap it, put the thing down, press on the link, and then you can just give us some feedback that helps us, work on these sessions for the next time we run one. Just say we will just stay on the line for a bit longer. So if you do have any questions that just come to mind, Charlotte, James, and myself will be happy to answer them if we can. So otherwise, if you're able just to click onto the feedback link. Otherwise, we'd like to say good evening. Thank you for coming, and we will see you next time. Thank you very much.